Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. After minor technical problems, we're back online. Good evening. This is Hardy, and I've got the lovely Meg with me. And tonight, after last week's talking about rail trips in New South Wales, tonight we want to take you somewhere very exotic, and that is the Kimberley region in the far north of WA. Meg, you've done this beautiful part of Australia on an overland trip. Why don't you tell us a little about it?
I have. Some of you may know, but not necessarily everyone would, that I'm a very proud West Australian, despite having lived in Sydney now for quite a long time. I grew up in the West, and I have very fond memories of travelling through the winter time at this time of the year, up into the northern parts of Western Australia, and on a couple of those occasions, right up into the Kimberley region. It is the most beautiful part of well, I shouldn't say it's the most beautiful part of Western Australia. It is an amazing part of Western Australia. There are some beautiful natural things to see, but the Kimberley is particularly special. It is so remote. It is so pristine, and like nowhere else in the world.
Untouched.
Absolutely, yeah. So I thought we might start with a few stats for those people who maybe don't know a lot about the Kimberley region. It is a massive part of Western Australia, and to put that into perspective, it covers about 420,000 square kilometres, and that equates to being roughly the size of Japan. It is slightly larger than Victoria, and about 3 times larger than England. So it is a massive area of land, stretching from Cable Beach in Broome on the west coast, all the way across to Lake Argyle near Kununurra on the eastern edge that borders the Northern Territory. So a massive
And it's very
landmass.
underpopulated, isn't it, for such a huge landmass?
Yeah, I think the 2016 census stats put the population at about 40,000 people. So it's not only one of the most remote parts of Australia, but also the least populated, which really sort of puts things into perspective. Of course, many of the people that live in the Kimberley region are Indigenous to the area, but you also have quite a mix now of ethnicity as well. European people came to the area in the late 1880s, as did the Chinese during the gold rush period, and established the pearl fishing industry. But as I say, Indigenous people had lived in the region for something like 40,000 years, and are obviously very in tune with country in that part of Australia. Of course, up in that part of Western Australia, you really only have 2 seasons each year, the wet and the dry, and
Makes it easy.
and they're vastly different. The wet season runs pretty much from November through to April, and as the name would suggest, is the period of the year that the area sees massive rainfall. Excuse me, and the dry then runs between May and October.
And during the wet season, I think it gets a lot warmer or much more humid during this time.
Yeah.
So that's something to probably consider when you plan a trip to the Kimberley. It is very hot and sticky up there during that wet season.
The other thing, of course, is that there are lots of parts of the region that are inaccessible during the wet season because there's just simply so much
Can't get
water
through.
and can't get through. I mean, that was something that I think was most staggering when I first visited the area. Was you think of Australia and our sort of outback and more remote areas as being really dry, and at certain times of the year they are, but I was stunned by the number of river systems and waterways and gorges that are just filled to overflowing during the wet season, and there's just so much water.
Massive wetlands during this time.
So travelling overland, of course, gives an amazing perspective and the opportunity to stop off at lots of places in between. But one of the other ways that in more recent years has become extremely popular for people to see the region is by ship. Obviously small ship, and it's quite an adventurous journey, so the operators that are cruising in that region are the smaller expedition style cruise lines. Very sadly, with COVID and the impact of the virus across the world, the season in the Kimberley this year has been drastically affected, and we have only one operator that has been able to cruise this season at all. That's True North, which is a West Australian based organisation. And I think we might have even alluded a week or so ago to the fact that they had just recommenced sailing. Those of you who live in Western Australia have been fortunate enough to be able to still take part in a Kimberley season this year. Those of us on the East Coast, unfortunately, have had to stay home.
But hopefully we will be back in 2021. We know a number of ships are planning to return to this part of the world. Expedition ships like Ponant can offer, or Silver Sea, and of course coral expeditions are operating in this part of the north coast or the northern part of Australia.
Now, Hardy, you have cruised the Kimberley region, haven't you?
Yes, I have, and it was amazing. It started off amazing because I actually came back from a trip from London. I don't know whether you remember, this is 5, 6, 7 years ago. Came back from a trip from London on a Sunday morning, and I came home and my better half told me, don't unpack, we just repack because we're flying to Darwin tonight. So that was a monster day and a half in flight. But the offer surprised me with a little trip up to the Kimberley. And in those days we had the lovely Orion up there, and we spent 10 glorious days sailing through this amazing part of Australia. I think it's a fantastic way to see it because overland is pretty rugged, right?
It is.
There's some good accommodation there in different places now.
But a lot of the roads are not even sealed at this point. So,
bumpy ride.
Very corrugated.
Which on Orion, of course, or on a small expedition ship, we didn't experience that ruggedness. We enjoyed the luxury of being on a very nice small little ship with just 80 or so passengers, and it was very exciting because when you go ashore, you don't go to a wharf, you get into a Zodiac. And as we already talked about last week, Zodiacs are a fantastic way to land on a beach or somewhere, and so easy to get in and out. And that's a real benefit for the more mature traveler that may have some disabilities and may not be so good on their feet, because the crew on these small ships are brilliant. They're just literally lifting you into the Zodiac, and you land on the beach and people will be there to help you out. So a great way to do something adventurous,
There are some beautiful parts of the Kimberley region that are really only accessible when you're cruising. The coastline is spectacular, isn't it? And there are a couple of really special opportunities for people to see sort of...
I think that's the problem when you're on a land trip, because you're looking out to sea. But when you're on a ship, you're looking at the land. And the red cliffs, the sandstone cliffs up in the Kimberleys are just incredible. Especially at sunrise and sunset time, when the light changes, the sun comes up and they light up, and they're just incredible colors that you see every day, changing and changing during the day. The color changes during the day, so it's fantastic.
And that's offset or sort of complemented by the beautiful sort of the waters are kind of almost like an icy blue-green colour, aren't they? And then you've got the green of the vegetation, and the three colours together are just something else.
And amazing blue skies, amazing Australian skies, with these lovely fluffy white clouds when they come over, and it is spectacular. A couple of highlights that I want to talk about. One of them being Montgomery Reef, and I have to admit, I've traveled the world, I've been to many places, but I did not know much about the Kimberley, and Montgomery Reef, I didn't really know, but David Attenborough knew about it. And he actually called it the eighth wonder of the natural world. It's an incredible area, the size of 400 square kilometers, making it the largest inshore reef in Australia. The length is about 80 kilometers, just to give you an idea. And because of the tidal changes, massive tidal changes up there, you're talking 10, 12, 14 meters of tidal differences. Unbelievable watching the water come in and go out. And because there's so much of the tidal change happening, it's really moving so fast and changes so quickly. I remember being in the Zodiac, and we cruised around a little bit, and the water was pretty flat, and we thought, what are we doing here? We're looking for Montgomery Reef. Okay, where is it? And then suddenly the tide went down. As the tide went down, this massive tabletop came out of the water. Well, the water came down on either side of the reef. And all these waterfalls appeared right along this tabletop. And I'll never forget, we were looking eye to eye into a turtle's face. And I was trying to lip read with the turtle. The turtle was obviously being washed off this tabletop and was not impressed at the time. But, well, I won't repeat what the turtle had on its lips. It was so much fun. It was so incredible because within a very short time, our Zodiac was like 3-4 meters below this tabletop. And the water gushing off this reef made it just spectacular. You know, the most spectacular natural side.
There's nothing like it in the world.
No. There's a couple of reefs up there that do the same with these massive tidal changes, and it's brilliant. So what you then see, of course, is vast lagoons and sandstone inlets, and the mangrove is being revealed, and obviously you get very close up and personal with some of the wildlife that's coming off that reef.
Yeah. Now another spot that I know is equally spectacular, and I remember my dad talking about this years ago. He went up with a group of friends on a fishing trip, and he brought back the most stunning photographs and stories about horizontal falls, which is another part of the Kimberley coastline that's massively affected by the tidal flow, but in a completely different way to any other waterfall that you would have seen. Tell us about that.
Again, another incredible sight. It's a very small gorge where this massive amount of water has to come through when the tide changes, going one way or the other. And because it's so fast, this turns into, it's like a waterfall, and it's vertical. Horizontal. Sorry, I always get this wrong. But what you can do, you can actually go through this waterfall with a speedboat. And it's one of the great adventures of things to do if you're up there. If you're doing it on a land tour, it's really hard to get to. You actually have to sort of kind of take a flight from Broome to get to the horizontal falls. But fantastic. But you mentioned fishing.
Yes.
Can I talk about fishing?
Do.
I was introduced to fishing by my uncle when I was about 5 years old, and boy did I hate it. He had a little boat, and we used to go fishing on the Titty Sea, which is a lake up in the Black Forest, and
a long way from the Kimberley.
A long way from the Kimberley in those days, but the water was quite cold. But I could never sit still for that length of time that my uncle would sit there with his fishing line, and nothing would happen for hours. And so I would jump in the water and go for a swim, which of course was not really popular with my uncle because I scared the fish away. So they decided to take us out fishing in the Kimberley. And I thought, I can't wait for this. This is bringing back childhood memories, And we all put our fishing lines in. There was about 5 or 6 of us on the boat at the time. We put our fishing lines in, and everyone started to pull out fish. And the crew was really happy with that. They said, look, we're going to cook this for you tonight for dinner. This is your fish, which, small ship can do that. So very, very, very great service. And and my fishing line didn't do anything. Every 2 minutes I had to put new bait on, but all that would happen would be my bait would disappear, but I wouldn't catch anything. So the fishing expedition nearly came to an end, and finally there was something happening on my fishing line, and I'm hanging on. It was getting more and more solid, and I pulled out this massive croaker, massive, very ugly thing, very ugly. Um, I looked at it. I didn't want to really hold it. Didn't look pretty, but as it turned out, my luck, it was a Queensland croaker that got a little bit lost, and of course, it's being a protected species. I had to throw my fish back overboard. So no fish for dinner, but that was fine by me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Gropers, I believe, are one of those fishes that live for a very long time. I think a little bit like the Galapagos turtles, that
Yep.
they can be 70, 80 years old.
And they grow
And they're-
massively big,
yeah.
massively big.
Mm.
Mine was only about this size. Fisherman story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was great day out. Fantastic memories.
There's just so much to do, isn't there? It's absolutely amazing. Now, I believe you went to a certain kind of bar too on the trip.
Oh yes. You've got to go to a bar when you're up in the Kimberley. I mean, it's a must, you know. And on those smaller ships, they're usually all inclusive, but we decided to go to a bar. And literally, we came from this fishing trip. We came around the rock face, and there was a sandbar in the middle of nowhere that had appeared out of the tidal changes, and they had it beautifully set up with beach umbrellas, with beach chairs, with the cocktail bar, with music, and the fabulous Orion logo that they were flying in those days, and the flags. And so we all went to this sandbar and had cocktails and watched the sunset, and then we started getting slowly wet feet. And then it got to the knees, and that was the time to pack up and get into the Zodiac and go back to the ship for dinner.
So
That
very
was-
specific opening hours.
Yes, indeed, and you had to watch that.
So
mm,
I was going to say, one of the other things that I think is a real highlight for people, whether you're travelling overland or by ship, is the opportunity to fly over certain parts of
Yes.
the region.
Most of the operators actually include the flights or offer it as an optional extra.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were flying to Mitchell Falls to have a look at Mitchell Falls, and that was done by helicopter. And what happened in the morning, we got off the ship by Zodiac, landed on the beach, and then it became like a James Bond movie. We could hear this sound of something happening, but we didn't see anything. The next thing is 5 helicopters came around the corner and landed on the beach, and we got in and we flew to Mitchell Falls and had a lovely swim up in the water holes up there, because you've got to be a little careful where you go swimming, Meg.
Mm-hmm.
The water is pretty alive up there, especially with saltwater crocodiles,
It can
and
be, yeah.
and they're quite big, and they're hungry. So swimming, watch out where you go swimming, because it's not always safe
Yeah.
everywhere.
One of the other highlights, which I have experienced, was flying over another region. So from Kununurra, we took a fixed-wing aircraft flight, scenic flight, down to Honolulu, which is the Bungle Bungle Ranges. And you may or may not have seen beautiful photographs, but especially from the air, you get an incredible sense of the size of the range. But they're all beehive shaped, and they've got
Yeah,
beautiful
yeah.
banding of the rocks that really make them stand out. And just as far as the eye can see, you've got these beautiful beehive structures.
They look like stacks of pancakes.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was just after breakfast.
Yeah, so that's another opportunity that's often offered for people who are cruising south. Many of the ships will call into Wyndham, and from there travel overland to Kununurra. There's the option of, as I say, there's scenic flight over the Bungle Bungles. There's also the opportunity to travel to El Questro, which is a homestead and station in the area. Or the third option that many of the operators provide is a boat ride from Lake Argyle down the Ord River, which is also spectacular. It's just the most beautiful country, and on that I think often they'll stop and they'll have afternoon tea in the middle of nowhere, and you again get that real sense of magnitude and the vastness of the countryside.
There's another amazing highlight when you go to the Kimberley, and I call that the open air art galleries. There are some fantastic spots where you see ancient rock art, amazingly well preserved. Like the color is still so vibrant, despite the fact that they're hundreds and thousands of years old. They haven't actually established how old some of these rock paintings are, but fantastic sites there.
Yeah. So, my goodness, so much to see, and some beautiful experiences that we've both been very fortunate to have. I don't know about you, but I would go back in a heartbeat.
Yes.
Perhaps next time for me by sea, as I haven't cruised the coastline. I think that would be quite spectacular.
That's the way to experience it, and I'm looking forward certainly having the Kimberley back online for next season, for next year. The operators will be back, and if you are considering a trip to the Kimberley, you should start looking at booking for next year now.
Yes, most definitely. Can I just say, unfortunately, many of our clients who had booked with the intention of travelling this season, unfortunately, have not been able to. And our team have been working incredibly hard over the last few weeks, as each of those departures has been cancelled, to assist clients to rebook for next year. And as a consequence, a lot of the availability is already sort of diminished. There are definitely still opportunities, but as Hardy said, if you're keen to travel, be sure to get in touch with us sooner rather than later.
Excellent. Kathy, did we have any questions tonight?
One question we've had is, when is the best time to visit the Kimberley?
Well, if you're doing the trip by ship, by expedition ship, if you go in the early part of the season, which would be May, June, that's when you still have massive amounts of water up there. And as the season goes on, of course, the water starts to dry up, which means if you want to see these massive big waterfalls, you want to go early in the season. The drawback, of course, with that is that it's still warmer and more humid during that time. So if you shy away from the heat and the humidity, then maybe push yourself a little bit into later, like July, August, when it's starting to get a bit more pleasant in that regard.
Yeah. The other highlight, of course, of going later in the season, sort of July, August, is that there's a very high chance of seeing whales as they're on their migratory route. So I know that a lot of people...
As they always say, you can't have it both ways, can you?
No, but for those who are more interested in those opportunities to see humpback whales and the like, later in the season is generally better.
Now, any other questions, Kathy? No, we're good. It's lovely to see some of you back on board tonight, and I hope we will see you back next week. We would love to hear from you if you want us to talk about any other topics. We would be thrilled to foster one of those.
Yes, absolutely.
But we've got a couple of ideas of what we want to do for next week and the week after. The first one is that we want to talk about, because of COVID and all the cruise cancellations, I think there's a lot of you out there that are concerned about your deposits, that are concerned about insurance issues, and future cruise credits. And we would like to take next Thursday from 5 o'clock for 20 minutes or 30 minutes to talk to you about how to make the most out of your future cruise credits, etc. So that's one of the subjects that we thought might be useful for some of you.
And then beyond that, we were chatting earlier today, and we thought we have so many amazing memories of the trips we've done with our clients over the years. So we thought we might indulge ourselves, if nobody else, and take a bit of a trip down memory lane. We've just had the most remarkable opportunities, haven't we?
I was telling Meg earlier, yesterday I wasn't going to be in the office, so I played at home with some old photos and some photo discs, and I came across some photos of a group called the Rats of Tupok. And these are World War II soldiers that were fighting in Tobruk in the war. And we managed to take these old diggers over to Al Alamein in Egypt, which was just incredible. There's some very fond and very proud moments in all our travel history that we maybe want to share with you for a little while. So I hope you're going to be back on board next week, and we look forward to chatting with you about future cruise credits and cancellations and insurance.
In the meantime, if you have any other ideas of what you would like us to talk about, please either put those comments in the section below, send us an email, give us a call. We would really love to have your feedback, and look forward to having more of these chats in the weeks ahead.
And I guess now, Meg, it's happy hour. Let's enjoy and sit back and relax.
Cheers, everybody.
Good night.
See you soon.
Bye for now.